All right, welcome back, everyone. Trump's back in the White House, and, well, you're probably thinking, what's this going to do to my wallet? It's 2025. The markets are already kind of freaking out a little.
Right.
So we're here to break it all down for you, cut through the noise, figure out what really matters.
Yeah.
For you, for your family, for your household budget, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because it's, we're not just talking about like, oh, he's going to change a few economic policies. It's really a whole new philosophy about America's role in the world.
Yeah.
And that impacts, everything.
It's like America first, but to the next level, right?
Exactly.
So let's jump right in.
Yeah.
Let's start with trade.
Okay.
Remember those tariffs on Chinese goods
Oh, yeah.
from Trump's first term?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they could be making a comeback, and not just on China either.
And this time, it's not just like soybeans or washing machines or something. Think about all the stuff you buy every day, right? Yeah. Groceries, your clothes, electronics. Pretty much everything relies on this huge, complicated global network.
Yeah.
And if those networks get messed up, you're going to feel it right in your wallet. Prices are going to go up.
Ouch.
Yep.
It's not just what we're buying, though, right?
Right.
Jobs are a big part of this, too.
Absolutely. I mean, some industries like manufacturing, they might actually benefit from these, these protectionist policies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bring jobs back to the U.S.
Right. Right.
But the flip side of that is it could mean even higher costs for businesses, which means those price increases could get even worse. It's a really tough balance.
Okay, so trade wars are back on the menu. What else should we be looking out for? I keep hearing about deregulation.
Yeah, deregulation is definitely a big part of the Trump playbook. Think back to his first term.
Yeah.
Fewer environmental rules, less oversight on Wall Street, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, less red tape. That's good for business. Businesses can grow faster.
Mm-hmm.
But the big question is, are we giving up things like clean air, worker protections, just for some short-term economic gain?
Yeah, that's a big one.
It's a tough question. We need to be asking that.
All right, well, what about the tax cuts everyone's talking about? Didn't we just do this a few years ago?
Yeah, it feels like deja vu, right? But yeah, tax cuts, especially for big corporations and wealthy folks, that's definitely on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is, okay, this is going to stimulate the economy, right?
Yes.
Businesses invest more, people have more money to spend.
Hmm.
But in reality, it's more complicated. We have to think about, what happens to the national debt?
Yeah.
Does this actually help the average American?
Right.
Or does it just make the gap between the rich and everybody else even bigger?
It's a good question.
Yeah, lots of questions, and we don't have the answers yet.
Right. It's like we're all in this giant economic experiment, and we don't know the results for years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, one last thing I got to ask about. Energy. Trump's a big fan of fossil fuels, right?
Yeah, domestic energy production, particularly oil and gas, that's likely to be a huge priority.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this could be good news if you're hoping for lower gas prices.
Sure.
But, what about climate change?
Yeah.
Are we going to see a move away from renewable energy?
Yeah.
And if so, what are the costs down the line?
Yeah, can't ignore that.
You can't.
All right, so we've got trade wars, we've got deregulation, tax cuts, and a big push for fossil fuels. That's a lot to take in.
It is.
But how does this all affect Main Street?
Right.
How does this affect our everyday lives? That's what we really want to unpack for our listeners today.
Yeah, because, all this big macroeconomic stuff, it can feel kind of abstract.
Yeah.
But it has a real impact on different parts of the economy.
Yeah.
And ultimately on your household budget.
Yeah.
So let's take a closer look at how that might actually play out.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. Let's start with something that everyone can relate to, your grocery bill.
Okay.
If those tariffs on imported goods actually happen, you're probably going to see higher prices. I mean, everything. Produce, packaged foods, you name it.
So no more avocado toast. Now, that's a real-world impact I can get behind.
Right. But remember we talked about those tax cuts?
Yeah.
Those could maybe help offset some of that.
Okay.
If people have a little extra money in their pockets because of those tax cuts,
Right.
that could help balance out the rising prices.
Makes sense.
But we also have to remember those tax cuts, they affect how much money the government has. Which could mean cuts to things like social programs, infrastructure spending, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's never simple, is it?
It's a complex equation with no easy answers, unfortunately.
Speaking of complex equations, what about housing?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Big expense for a lot of people.
That huge, yeah.
How might all this affect the housing market?
Well, a lot depends on what happens with those interest rate hikes we were talking about.
Yeah.
If the Fed raises rates to, try to control inflation, it could make mortgages more expensive,
Right.
which could, cool down the housing market a bit.
So does that mean it's a good time to, like, lock in a low rate if you can?
That's a conversation to have with a financial advisor for sure.
Good point.
But it's important to remember that a cooler housing market could also make it tougher for people to buy a home,
Yeah.
especially, first-time buyers.
Right.
It's not all good or all bad. It really just depends on your individual circumstances.
So many moving pieces.
Lots of ripple effects.
Yeah, we got to be aware of.
Definitely.
What about jobs? I know you mentioned manufacturing might see a boost, but what about other sectors?
Yeah, well, the job market, it's always changing, but some sectors are probably going to feel it more than others.
Mm-hmm.
Like agriculture, for example.
What?
They rely a lot on those trade deals.
If those deals fall apart, farmers could lose some of those export markets.
Right.
Prices could drop, which would hurt jobs, especially in rural areas.
What about tech? Feels like that's a huge part of the economy these days.
Oh, tech is really interesting because, well, it could benefit from some of these policies, but it could also be targeted.
Oh, how so?
Well, on the one hand, you've got those tax cuts. Those could be good for big tech companies.
Sure.
But on the other hand, there's a lot more scrutiny on things like data privacy and antitrust issues that could lead to more regulation, which might slow down innovation and growth.
So it's kind of a mixed bag for tech.
Yeah, a lot of uncertainty for both tech workers and investors.
Sounds like uncertainty is a big theme.
It really is. I mean, we're in uncharted territory.
Yeah.
No one can predict the future. We just got to wait and see how these policies actually play out in the real world.
So it's a wait-and-see game, but we can't just sit here and do nothing.
Right.
So what can our listeners do to prepare for this economic roller coaster?
That's a great question. What steps can they take to protect themselves and their families?
First of all, don't panic.
Okay, good advice.
We've been through economic ups and downs before. We'll get through this too.
Right.
But knowledge is power.
True.
The more you understand about these policies and how they might affect things, the better prepared you'll be to make good decisions.
So stay informed.
Yes.
Read different perspectives.
Absolutely.
Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Exactly. Talk to financial advisors, do your own research, and really think about how all this might affect your personal finances. Do you need to adjust your budget? Think about your investment strategy. Those are all good questions to ask yourself.
It's about taking control, even when things feel uncertain.
Exactly. And remember, this isn't just about individual choices.
Right.
It's about being part of the bigger conversation about economic policy. Make your voice heard. Contact your elected officials. Go to community forums.
Yeah.
Make sure your perspective is part of the discussion.
Because at the end of the day, the economy isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet.
It's about people's lives.
Exactly.
It's about creating an economy that works for everybody, not just a select few.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, on that note, I think it's time to shift gears a bit and talk about the long-term implications of all of this. What are the potential consequences that could last even after Trump's presidency?
Yeah, that's a crucial question.
So we've talked about like the immediate stuff, the things that are going to hit us right away. But what about the long game? The long-term consequences, what do we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, for the country, for you and me, for
listeners, personally, yeah.
Exactly. And I think one of the biggest things is that national debt. We touched on it earlier.
Yeah, the elephant in the room.
It is. And, tax cuts sound great in the short term, but they also mean the government's taking in less money.
Less revenue, right?
Exactly. And if that debt keeps piling up, it can really destabilize things down the road.
It's like putting it all on a credit card and just hoping we can pay it off later.
Kinda, yeah.
But what does that actually mean? Like, what are the real-world consequences of a giant national debt?
Well, it can lead to higher interest rates for everybody.
Oh.
So everything, mortgages, car loans, even starting a business, it all gets more expensive.
Wow.
And it can make it harder for businesses to invest and grow,
Right.
which slows down the whole economy.
Makes sense, yeah.
And in a worst case scenario, I mean, it could even trigger another financial crisis.
Okay, now that's scary.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of.
And what about that growing gap we talked about?
Yeah.
Between the rich and everybody else, how does all of this affect that in the long run?
Well, if you have tax cuts that mostly benefit the wealthy, And then you combine that with potential cuts to things like social programs.
Right, the safety net.
Exactly. It could make that inequality even worse.
Oh, wow.
And that can lead to a lot of problems. Social unrest, less economic mobility.
Yeah, less opportunity for people to, you know, climb the ladder.
Exactly. And in the end, it hurts everybody. It creates a less prosperous society overall.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that a healthy economy isn't just about, like, the stock market going up.
Right.
It's about fairness. It's about everyone having a chance.
It's about opportunity. Absolutely.
So are there any other long-term things, consequences we should be keeping an eye on?
Well, one that I think is really important is the environment.
Yeah, we talked about Trump and his focus on those fossil fuels.
Right. And if that translates into rolling back environmental regulations and cutting funding for renewable energy,
Yeah.
it could have a massive impact on climate change.
And we're already seeing those impacts, right?
Oh, absolutely. Extreme weather, rising sea levels.
Yeah.
It's not just an environmental issue anymore. It's an economic one, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because climate change, it threatens infrastructure, agriculture, public health,
Right.
all of which cost a lot of money to deal with.
So investing in clean energy, it's not just good for the planet, it's good for our wallets, too.
Exactly. It's an investment in our future.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing our listeners should really take away from all of this?
I think the biggest thing is to stay informed and stay engaged. These are complicated issues.
Yeah.
There are no easy answers.
Definitely not.
But the more you understand about the potential impacts, the good and the bad,
Right.
the better decisions you can make for yourself and your family.
About your finances, about who you vote for, about all of it.
Exactly. And you can advocate for policies that create a strong and sustainable economy that benefits everybody.
So pay attention, ask questions, make your voice heard. That's what it means to be a deep diver. Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the issues that matter most.